Hey everyone, Zeffi, and welcome back to the channel. So very cool guitar chick, Ayaka Sakai, is now officially available as a synergy in P5X Global, Japan, and soon to be C. And she will become available as the next limited 5-star unit, also known as Chord, in P5X's next big patch 2.0. Now, I'm pretty sure everyone and their mum knows about Chord and how she is definitely a must-pull unit. And so in today's video, I'll just be going over everything that you need to know about her. So this includes her skills, her skill rotations, her skill priorities, awarenesses, team comps, weapons, and revelation cards. So you better buckle up, people, because we are going to be talking about the best support unit coming to Persona 5 the Phantom X in patch 2.0. But before this video begins, definitely don't forget to leave a like and subscribe on the video. It definitely helps out the channel a bunch, as well as the YouTube algorithm. Don't forget to join the Gacha Rebels Discord as well, link in the description. And also don't forget to become a member of the Zeffi channel and join the 50/50 Winners Club. You get access to exclusive perks and emotes. We just got 2 new emotes unlocked, so definitely go check that out. And I really appreciate just basically people just watching the videos because it means a lot, and it's amazing how this P5X community has been growing. Now, a disclaimer before this video begins as well is that Chord may or may not get a buff. Now, I don't really think that Chord actually really needs a buff because I do think that she's a universal support that is just very good and just works with a lot of DPS carries. But this video is, at least at the time of recording, is before any buffs have been announced. However, if there are significant buffs, I'll probably do another video. But if the buffs are slightly okay, just like what happened with Phoebe, then I probably will just put it into a pinned comment if they are substantial enough. So basic Chord overview is that she is an attack scaling buffing type support unit with her persona Calliope, centered around buffing attack, crit, and of course her main unique talent, forcing unit highlights and buffing them. Now what I mean by forcing unit highlights is that she can make highlights available for any unit she chooses, even if the gauge is not charged. And this highlight doesn't actually include the actual highlight itself as well, and this highlight doesn't actually use any highlight energy, which means that you can actually use a secondary highlight straight after. She is the only unit that can do this, and with a lot of current units and more future units that synergize perfectly with her, her pull priority shoots straight up. Even if a DPS unit doesn't necessarily utilize highlights to do much damage in their kit, her generic attack and crit buffs are still insane and can be utilized by most DPSs in the game now or into the future. So what does Chord actually do? At awareness 0 at the start of battle, Catchy Hook has a 1-turn cooldown. Catchy Hook is her skill 3. Whenever she uses her skill 3, she permanently increases her own attack by 20%. Up to 2 stacks. And after using skill 3 Catchy Hook by 1 turn, it permanently increases the cooldown to 3 turns. And after using skill 3 for the first time, it goes on a 3-turn cooldown cycle. So this basically just means that more attack means more scaling from her buffs because she is attack scaling. And essentially skill 3 is the skill that is basically going to be forcing the highlights and is pretty much fundamental to her kit. Another thing that's fundamental to her kit is the main buff she applies, which is called Co-Star. This increases the attack of an ally based on Ayaka Sakai's attack, and with this buff, it gives additional effects to units with it. So for her skills, as noted here, we'll start with skill 2. Skill 2 basically applies the Co-Star buff. It increases their attack based on 24% of Ayaka's attack for 3 turns up to 840, and there can only be 1 Co-Star. Skill 1 is called Distortion, deals 63% attack electric damage to all foes. If there is a Co-Star, the Co-Star deals an additional electric damage based on 61.4% of their attack to the main target. And then skill 3 that we talked about for Catchy Hook, select one ally to immediately use their highlight. Increases that highlight damage by 57.6%. Highlight used by the skill will not count towards their highlight cooldown. If the target is a cease member, then the increase in the next Theater G final damage amp by 14.4%. So this basically means that the highlight is not included in the normal highlight cooldown, which means that you can use 2 highlights in quick succession. It makes it even more complex that you can use a DPS highlight and also use a supporting highlight or a sustained highlight without the need to choose one or the other. So that can factor into different rotations for different team comps. And of course, if you couldn't get enough of Chord's highlights capability and attack button capability, this is her highlight. Increases all allies damage bonus by 33.6% for 4 actions. Restore 10% highlight energy after each ally's action up to 40%. And this is basically insane. So once you do this, you essentially can ramp up an additional highlight as well as Catchy Hook as well. So essentially with Chord, you are getting highlight after highlight after highlight, buff after buff after buff. Now her passives are backing track. When an ally uses a highlight or Theurgy, immediately increase their attack by 24% for 1 turn. Increases effect by 1.5 times if they are the Co-Star. And then the other passive is Chorus Effect. After an ally uses a highlight or Theurgy, you immediately restore 15% attack plus 1350 HP to the lowest HP % ally. So with basically her skill 1 as well as her skill 2, it essentially becomes a generic attack buffing unit. So now basically, how do you use Ayaka Sakai? So there are essentially 2 different ways you could kind of use her. One is just a generic buffing unit in general, as well as the other one is factor into your highlight rotations. So in terms of skill rotations, it includes either a 2-turn or a traditional 3-turn cycle. Now, if you have speed tuned your team, where the DPS unit goes last, you can do a 2-turn rotation of S2, which applies the co-star buff, and then obviously gives the additional effect for co-star, into skill 3 in order to force their highlight. Obviously, forcing their highlight is dependent on the DPS carry. I will be going over this briefly in the team section, so stay tuned for that one. So if you do the S2 into S3, the 2-turn rotation, you can basically do a fully buffed DPS unit's highlight on turn 2. Again, it's best that if Chord moves definitely before the DPS unit, and it's best that basically the DPS unit moves last. Otherwise, the 3-turn rotation will ensure all buffs from Chord are active on the DPS carry that you're wanting to buff, especially if you want to slow ramp the damage rather than front load the burst. This, for example, works well for like Jungler and Kasumi. Either the 2-turn or 3-turn really works for pretty much anyone. It really depends on the situation. Works well for Jungler, works well for Kasumi, for example, in order to set up Jungler's Will of Rebellion, or to set up posture stacks on Kasumi. In terms of your skill priority, I will definitely level skill 3 first, and then into skill 2. Definitely improves the scaling on both of them, and then into skill 1. But I mean, to be honest, all skills really need to be maxed if you do want to get the max utility and the max buffing capabilities out of Chord. So in general, with her kit, especially with her passives backing track, as well as skill 2, she essentially becomes an insane attack damage. She essentially becomes an insane attack buffer, getting 24% of owner's attack, as well as backing track whenever they use a highlight or theurgy, an additional 24% for 1 turn, and then increase this by 1.5 times as well. So basically anyone who utilizes their highlights or has great scaling on their highlights, or who basically just do massive damage on their highlights, you essentially really want Chord. But even if they don't do that, the buffs that you potentially get with the unison notes, for example, in skill 2 is definitely very good. Alright, next is the awarenesses. So let's look at awareness 1, Hard Rock. At the start of battle, select one ally to become the co-star, prioritizing the highest attack assassin or sweeper ally. Co-star gains an additional effect, increases crit rate by 15%. Now this is what I was talking about with the stopping point at the awarenesses for Chord. A1 is definitely very good for her, because you essentially apply the co-star buff straight away without actually having to need to use skill 2. So you can actually start the battle with skill 1 to get the additional buffs from skill 1, and then you can force the highlight on skill 3. Additionally, you do gain an additional crit rate by 15% on the person with co-star. At awareness 2, it's just a skill up, and awareness 3, I believe this will get swapped around for global and western releases. When using Catchy Hook, immediately increase that ally's damage by 30% for 1 turn, which is again another damage increase, percentage boost. At awareness 4 is a skill up. At awareness 5, highlight enhanced, increase damage bonus duration to 6 ally actions, increases highlight energy restore cap to 60%, and decrease all other allies highlight cooldown by 1 turn. Now this is also really insane, because especially decreasing all other allies highlight cooldown by 1 turn. And then of course you got A6, Spirit of Rock. Catchy Hook is ready at the start of battle. Permanently decrease Catchy Hook's cooldown by 1 turn up to 2 turns, increase all allies damage by 50% after using Catchy Hook up to 2 stacks. And this basically just makes her a highlight ripping machine. So you will essentially be able to get a highlight off every single 2 turns. And this synergizes super well, especially with DPS carries that use highlight, but it also just works well in general because you are getting the generic 50% attack up every time you use Catchy Hook, and then you can stack this up to 2 times. So you're essentially getting attack boost on attack boost on attack boost, with the added benefit of also using a lot of highlights. So in terms of awarenesses, I do recommend a good stopping point is definitely A1. A1 definitely just gives her a lot more utility, especially with the crit rate up 15%, as well as just starting with co-star straight away. So you don't actually have to use skill 2, you can go straight into skill 1 and then into skill 3. And that way you get the maximum buffing potential of Chord straight away. In saying that, next best stopping option is actually probably going to be the A6. So it's either you go all in for Chord, or you just kind of stop at A1, hopefully you get lucky with a double. Alright, so for team comps in general, she is a generic attack buffing unit, so works well with any DPS unit that scales off attack. She definitely slots into most teams, obviously except for use case team who scales off defense, as well as Queen's team who really does scale off and does a lot of damage based on elements. In saying that though, Chord can still work in the Queen's team, especially with the attack ups, but you definitely do want at least Vino or at least someone else who can apply a lot of elements in order to get maximize Queen's damage. And saying that as well, if you do have Yumi Sheena, for example, or Phoebe, then definitely doing a mono setup with Queen, Leon, and Vino will definitely work wonders in that team. But you can replace Leon in that team with Chord if you do want to use Phoebe on a mono fire team, for example, or on a different team in general. Now, the current units on Global that would work especially well with her will definitely include Joker to do massive curse damage on the highlight, but also to gain Will of Rebellion stacks in order to get Joker's additional turns more consistently. Works super well if you have dupes on Joker as well, especially with A5, I believe it was, or maybe it's changed to A4, where you do get 3 Will of Rebellion stacks after using highlight. So for all those people who said that John Clare is probably quite dead at the moment with all the new DPSs coming out, he is not dead yet. John Clare will never die. Chord also works very, very well in an Arn team, for example, because Arn scales off attack. And with the buffs, you do an additional, I think it's between 20 to 25% damage increase, especially if you're replacing Lufel in that team, for example. Now, other teams that Chord works really, really well in for units that haven't been released in, Kasumi is definitely one with ramping damage. You basically want to use as many highlights as you possibly can with Kasumi, because every time Kasumi uses a highlight, you gain additional bonuses and damage effects. As well as Kasumi being basically a single target, super high damaging burst highlight carry, you definitely really want Chord in that instance. You can also use Mesa to keep applying the dot stacks with his highlight, for example. So basically with Mesa, you just want to apply DOT effects for his bleed. And then in order to do that, you apply essentially 3 to 5 stacks with the highlight. So more stacks means more damage for Mesa. Other units that work really, really well, as including Haru as well. Again, utility on the highlight essentially, as well as working well with her general kit by getting customization stacks. Other great units as well for Chord include Berry, because Berry is trying to get max covert stacks, which is basically her little scaling thing at the bottom of her screen that you can see. And essentially with more covert stacks means you get additional damage, additional crit, as well as additional DOT damage. And in order to get these covert stacks, you can either use skill 1, or you can also use highlight. So essentially with Berry, you can actually be able to get max covert stacks at 3 with skill 1 into highlight with Chord. I should also mention that Rin's CNY works very, very well as well, considering that after highlight, she basically buffs up her click one button to delete a move in Fiery Shooting Star, which is her S3. And basically after you highlight, you get a damage increase. And if you highlight again, you get another damage increase. So more damage increases essentially. And also, scales of attack and then DPS unit. You can see the multiple opportunities and potential team comps with Chord. Now we'll go over her weapons, and I believe her weapons are definitely a big deal. And I'll go over the pull priorities between A1 dupe as well as weapons after. But basically her signature weapon, Groovy Session, increases attack by 30 to 70%. And the big one, gives highlight energy when entering battle. You will get an increase on the co-star's attack by 50%. And each time an ally uses a highlight or theurgy, increases the co-star's attack by 5%, stacking up to 3 times. So you're essentially already giving a buff to the co-star with S2, and now you're just additionally getting an additional 15% up to another additional 15% on top of that. So the base buff on S2 is 25%, and now you're getting additional 15 and a potential additional 15 as well. So you're essentially getting a 50% attack boost just using this weapon alone. Now, in comparison with her 4-star weapon, which is Tempers of Rhythm, it only really increases attack by 12%. After using Catchy Hook, increases attack by 28% for 2 turns. And this is only on Chord's attack. So in terms of the pull value of the 5-star, it is definitely extremely high. But compared to the 4-star, there's really no competition. You definitely want to try and get the weapon if you can. Now, in saying that, do you need to pull for it necessarily? I mean, again, in my opinion, yes, you do. But at least I highly advise that you do. This is basically because it provides her a lot more buffing capability and utility rather than relying on Chord's own skills and own attack scaling to provide the buffs to your carries. And in comparison with the 5-star, for example, with the 5-star, you're directly buffing units you buff with the co-star buffs as well as the additional highlight energies, but you're also indirectly buffing them because you do get more attack scaling on Chord. In saying that, will you be fine without her signature weapon if you are F2P or you're running low on pulls? Yes, you'll be more than okay, because again, she's just a generic attack buffer and essentially really only the additional points of the weapon with the highlight energy as well as the additional attack ups are really just icing on the cake essentially. Her base kit in general is already really, really good. Now the real question is, do you really want to get the A1 over the weapon or vice versa? Now if you look at purely what you get from both objectively, weapon is just better in every aspect. Yes, the immediate co-star effect is definitely nice, plus the 50% crit rate, But let's be honest, you do have other buffing units, like especially on Wonder. I mean, Dio exists, and with all the additional benefits to highlight and attack scaling on the weapon in particular, you'll actually eke out more DPS with an A0 5-star weapon rather than just an A1 Chord with a 4-star weapon. So I highly recommend that you just go for Chord at A0 and then just get a copy of a signature 5-star weapon. Now for Revelation cards, you can definitely go with the attack buffing sets or highlight buffing sets as she scales off her attack. On the other regions, her card setup recommendations include 4-piece Affluence and Trust, which gives the added effect of 25% highlight recovery on the 4-piece, and every time you use a skill, gives party members 8% attack buff with the Trust space card. Or you can go with the 4-piece Reconciliation set with Creation space card. 4-piece Reconciliation gives 15% increase in HP, defense, and attack, and with Creation gives the lowest speed, ally, and attack buff, which should always be your DPS carry anyway. For main stats, you're looking for healing bonus on the moon, attack percent for star, attack percent for planet. For your subs, you definitely want attack percent, HP percent, and then defense percent for survivability, and or SP recovery for long drawn out fights. Now the cap at S2 is approximately 4100 attack, and if you do reach 4100 attack in battle, then you can definitely change up those attack substats for HP substats or defense substats in order for survivability. HP is recommended because you do get HP recovery on one of her passives. So now the real question becomes, is Chord worth pulling? I mean, yes, of course she is. She is a great generic attack buffing unit with the added benefit of her highlights and how her highlights work, especially forcing them without actually having to use the regular highlight energy or highlight gauge. It works especially well with the highlight bonuses, especially for DPS units that can utilize highlights in a big way, or even to stack highlights when she forces one, so you can use highlights in quick succession, for example. Great unit and definitely a must pull in the game. Honestly, just one of the best supports. She scales well into the future. A lot of people still use her on CN Taiwan Korea to this very day. And as I mentioned in the team comp section, just pretty much works with every single DPS carry, and then works especially well with certain DPS carries like Kasumi, Mesa, and Berry, for example. So if you are a fan of those specific DPS carries, which I know some people in the Gacha Rebels definitely excited for Kasumi, Chord is definitely a must pull. But she also just works with every single DPS unit in the game. That scales off attack, obviously. Sorry, Yusuke fans, like it's probably not gonna. She's gonna be useless for Yusuke, but everyone else should be pretty good. So that's pretty much it for the video. Again, essentially just very good generic attack buffer. I can definitely do some very good stuff in specific teams set up for a highlight. Currently on global, however, or Western releases, Jonkler is really the only one that kind of can utilize the highlight-ish. Especially because of the Wheel of Rebellion stacks and how the extra turns work. Especially if you have a fully duped Joker, for example, can work really well. The consistency on extra turns is going to be absolutely insane. And then there's also, you know, generic attack buffing as well. Can work decently well with Queen. However, in Queen's team, you do, you know, especially if you're running Phoebe, it's probably still better to run an all mono nuclear team with Leon. But you can obviously swap out Leon for the generic attack buffs as well. And that should still work just fine, especially if you're going to be using Bashama 10 on Wonder. It should still count for your 3 mixes to form into a premium cocktail with Phoebe. Yusuke, not going to be great, but again, like Yusuke's teams are very niche anyway, and you will eventually be getting Cherish anyway. Where is Cherish? You'll be getting this guy anyway, and then this guy is basically best in slot for Yusuke anyway, which we'll go more over when Cherish releases on the Western servers. But yeah, other than that, future units, you know, especially if you're liking Kasumi, Mesa, Haru, CNY Rin, Berry, for example. Yeah, just honestly, guys, just pull for Chord. You won't be disappointed at all. And she's just a great universal support and still scales well into the future, especially if you are a Western only player. She's going to be used in a lot of different teams, trust me. So let me know your thoughts about Chord down below in the comments. Are you going to pull for her? Are you going to not? I mean, I'm pretty sure everyone is going to pull for her, so maybe the comments are just going to be yes. But if you're not going to pull for her, definitely let me know why. You know, if you're saving for a specific unit, etc., I definitely want to know the reason. So once again, thanks for watching this video. I really do appreciate all the support, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.
Who hit the tip top of an adventure?